Welcome to My Brain Day. My name is Pavan Davra, and I'm an independent neuroscientist. Today we're going to talk on why do we suffer in silence and what happens inside the brain. The point here is that, we need to understand that, like I always say, everything is inside. There is nothing outside. You suffer because you've been taking all of that inside your brain, and then you suffer in silence. But then what happens inside the brain? That is important. As you see, I have a picture drawn here. It's not a good picture though, but it's a part of that brain that I'm talking about. So this is the basic brain anatomy model that I've drawn here. So this is the prefrontal cortex, and this is the central sulcus. Central sulcus divides between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. This is the occipital lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. This is the cerebellum, and this is the midbrain. This is the pons, and this is the medulla. I made it very simple, as simple as I can, but the diagram is okay. This is the lateral sulcus that actually divides the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe, the prefrontal lobe and the temporal lobe. So you can see the division that's happening here. So when there is a suffering from inside, what happens to the brain? When we try to understand in terms of prefrontal cortex, we understand that prefrontal cortex helps you in thinking and understanding the situation pretty well and making the right decision. It also works pretty well with the hippocampus. So there is a certain degree of communication that is happening between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. But when there is a suffering in silence, what happens to the brain inside during suffering in silence? Now, when we talk on communication between the cerebellum and the prefrontal cortex, or we say like cerebellum with the frontal lobe. So when there is a significant amount of communication that's happening with the help of temporal lobe. Now, what is the role of the temporal lobe? Let's say when you hear something, it goes up to the part of the information goes to the cerebellum, and all of that information is sent up to the frontal lobe. Let's say you hear something and it goes inside, and then all of that information is transferred to the cerebellum. Now the cerebellum takes all of that information to the frontal lobe, and then there is information, the modification that happens between cerebellum and prefrontal cortex. As you see, I've drawn the line. This is the end result to do the perfect action that we need to perform after collecting all of that data. But then suffering in silence means when a collection of data that happens inside the brain, it goes up to here, and all of that is processed to make it the right move. But then what happens if the brain has all the negativity inside of it more than the positive? Then what happens to this communication? The biggest cult is the limbic system that makes it more difficult to come out of this negativity. Now that we learned about a basic thing, that how the auditory that goes inside and it process all in the cerebellum, and then we are having a perfect timing of our motor functions, because the cerebellum is helping you to make it the right way. So then what happens is that when all of this happens, then we go ahead and dissect the brain in deeper. These are the positive charge and the negative charge of the neurons, and these are the neurons that we're talking about that attacks the brain. Sorry, not the attacks the brain, that communicates with the brain regions, I'm sorry. Then what happens is that when you look at this area, this is the limbic system that I'm talking about. This is the inside part of the brain. This is the hippocampus. This is the thalamus. This is the VTA. And this is the amygdala. And this is the prefrontal cortex. Now what happens is that all of these neurons, when the information is stored inside the brain, the communication that happens amongst all of them is full of negative. There is no positive charge. These red lines that I put is full of negative charge that communicating with all of these brain regions. But here's the interesting part is, even though we see this and this is pretty close, the communication that happens between them goes all the way around. As you can see, that it travels all the way around and then it communicates with the hippocampus. This is how the amygdala communicates with the hippocampus. But then when the end result from the thalamus, it goes back straight to the prefrontal cortex. And then the limbic system will trigger this amygdala to the point that it will produce only negative than the positive. So the more the negative is produced inside the brain, the amygdala will not allow you to change into any positive situation, because when it communicates with the hippocampus, it will only allow the negativity to shown inside your brain when you're suffering in silence. All of that negativity will be projected inside your head, and the thalamus will communicate with the prefrontal cortex, and the end result will come out as you're suffering in silence. This suffering is nothing but the part of your inside of your brain that is going on. The axon, or the neurons that we're talking about, the cell body soma. Now, when the pocket is open, something like this, you see, this is where the cell body, it goes inside. When it enters in this, all more negativity is produced by these neurons. And the more of these red that I'm talking about, then imagine how many negativity is going to be passed on to these brain regions. The stronger this communication gets, the difficult it's going to get for you to come out of this. So please try to understand that the only way to come out of this is to stimulate this prefrontal cortex. By stimulation of prefrontal cortex, we're able to understand that we can think well, we can make right decision, we can also understand the condition of the suffering. So when you do all of this, you got to stimulate your prefrontal cortex. You have to come out of your depression and then understand, even if you're suffering in silence, remember the cell bodies will produce more and more of negative than the positive. So imagine if all of these negativity, the cell body, soma, is going to connect with all of these brain regions. Already amygdala is one of those cults that doesn't allow you to come out of it. Then imagine the part of hippocampus that's going to make it even worse for you. So please try to understand that if you want to come out of it, then stimulate the prefrontal cortex. This is the only way that you can come out of it, is to calm this part of this limbic system. Calm this limbic system down by, I write it down here, by guided meditation, breathing exercises, and by eating well and having a good sleep cycle. You see, when you have all of this, you can calm this limbic system, and then you can increase the level of prefrontal cortex. And another thing that you can do is practice when you calm your amygdala, practice to smile 15 minutes every morning. Try and practice to smile. That will change the way you're thinking. The smile will help you to increase your mood. Even getting out in the sun for 15 minutes will help you with that. And also, learning new things can increase the level of prefrontal cortex. So please understand that your mental health is important to your family. God bless you all, and may you have an abundant, sweet life. Hare Krishna.